The town of Grand Rapids kept its ghosts neatly boxed and labeled. Decades after the laughter stopped, after the lights were shuttered and the pizza ovens cold, the faded signs and boarded windows still spoke in the same tone as a closed mouth. They once belonged to kids. Parents told themselves the reasons the restaurants closed were bureaucratic. Financial, a product of trend and time. A few older people said quieter things, that something terrible had happened there. Children who had been dragged home from those arcade rooms never came back. Names were said quickly and then changed, as if the syllables stuck in the throat. Mike Schmidt grew up with one of those names stuck in his throat. Garrett. He had been taken when Mike was very young, a sticky-handed memory of a purple car and a man who never stopped meaning anything but loss. By 2004, that memory worked on Mike like rust, slow and relentless, eating through what steadiness he'd tried to build. Jobs came and went. Anger came and came again, misdirected and then regretted. He lived with his 11-year-old sister, Abby, in a cramped rental house that smelled of old tea and younger dreams. Abby still wanted a birthday party. Mike still wanted to make sure the world didn't ask them to sleep on the street. When desperation becomes decision, small towns turn to familiar ruins. Old businesses, abandoned arcades, shuttered diners, places other people avoid are suddenly resource-rich to someone with nothing to lose. Steve Raglan promised steady pay, a week-long stretch of nights, and a fat weekend bonus that would solve rent and breathe life into the idea of a summer birthday party. The job was at a pizzeria Mike had seen only in grainy photographs. Freddy Fazbear's pizza place, a place most of the town protected itself from remembering. The building sat further back than other stores, its marquee half swallowed by vines. The windows were dark but not empty. Something about the way the building kept its silhouette meant it had been waiting. Raglan drove with a practiced charm, telling tales of dancing robots and pinball tokens. He didn't tell Mike everything. Some things in Grand Rapids were best left unsaid. The way you put a hand against the dented frame of a childhood toy and let the hurt stay inside. Mike said yes. The office was smaller than the brochure. 2 steel doors with tiny vents that didn't look like they were meant to stop anything. A bank of monitors that hummed like bees. And a VHS player as if the earth had been rewound to a time where tapes were still trusted to hold truth. The stage caught in the cone of Mike's flashlight like something caught in a throat. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica. Foxy's Cove was a dark cave just off stage, a pirate-torn curtain hiding the thing that moved like a shadow. There was a tape on the desk with Mike's name written in marker. Vanessa Shelley's voice filled the office with syrupy warmth when he put it in the player. A tour guide voice teaching safety rules and mascot names. The tape smiled and then hiccuped into static. When the lights flicked and the cameras cycled, Mike noticed it. A pair of eyes on the stage that twitched open for a second like a photograph coming to life. Anxiety is a treacherous lens. It refocuses the ordinary into the monstrous with the patience of a predator. The cameras showed Bonnie empty, then creeping through the dining room like a loosened puppet. A blue blur at 3 a.m. moved with the wrong angles, elbows bending as if in the shadow of an old human gate. Mike learned to shut doors and hold his breath. Bonnie found the office and banged on the door, a sound like plastic against wood and the thud of 100 small shoes. He kept the door closed. Chica arrived an hour later, a candlewick mouth and a cupcake named Carl that looked more like an accusation than dessert. When the clock spun past 6, the animatronics retreated to their stage places like children pulled from mischief by a bored parent. Mike's relief tasted metallic and thin. Steve Raglan texted an empty smile the next day, as if salary were the only conversation worth having. The town's memory was a room of cracked mirrors. If anyone had asked, Raglan might have said the place was sentimental or that the owner was stubborn. If anyone had looked, they would have seen how the building kept its doors closed even to demolition men. If anyone listened, maybe they could have heard the tape static at the heart of the place, like a glitch in the weather. Vanessa Shelley was blonde in the way museum mannequins are blonde, real enough and slightly off. She found Mike near dawn, breath caught and hollowed out by a night of doors and shadows. "I'm on the morning swing," she said, and later she told how she loved the place as a child, how the animatronics had taught her the cadence of joy. Vanessas are always a little uncanny. Small-town legends love to grow the edges of people into something else. She seemed a little too happy until the animatronics nearly took her finger. Foxy came with a sudden, jerking burst, pirate music and teeth, a malformed jolt from his cove. Freddy's face watched the CCTV cameras the way a general watches a map, precise and patient. Vanessa tried to act like a coworker, but the way she locked the office doors showed she already knew the rhythms, the taps and the soft, practiced scraping that meant an animatronic had decided they were hungry for attention. There was an odor in the back room when Mike opened it, oil and the sourness of something that had been left to rot. Vanessa said stay away from that room. Mike said the same in his head, leave the room to the town's unsaid memory. But curiosity is a dishonest friend, and the second night's conclusion tied itself with a ribbon of dread. The light on the half door in the back room found more than grease and broken props. Bodies were a library of old violence, those who had tried to pry open the place and vanished. Mike stopped cataloging details as much as he saw them. The room held a story, and he felt like an intruder in a text that hadn't been meant for him. Each corpse was a page folded over and forgotten. Vanessa had never known. The pizzeria kept its secrets like fossils, pressed and preserved in the dark. They were not alone when they left the back room. A night vision camera showed another intruder, an ugly, quick silhouette, racing across the kitchen tiles with Chica advancing like a mechanical tide. Chica's cupcake, Carl, glinted with a child's innocence turned nasty. The intruder fell, and the sound that came from the camera had no business being recorded by a security feed. Vanessa and Mike crawled and hid, and listened to the world rearrange itself into the sound of someone else being erased. Power dipped. The building was a laboratory for fear. When they crawled back to the office, their breaths were small the way you hold breath under cold water. Vanessa's story unspooled like a ribbon caught on something sharp. Raglan wasn't Raglan. Steve Raglan was an alias, a name worn like a costume to fit into a town's trust. When Vanessa whispered the old man's real name, William Afton, Mike felt the floor tilt in the room. Afton was the missing dark in local stories, the man who had been accused, always just shy of indictment. He had a daughter who still wore his last name as if it were a brand of shame. Mike tried Raglan's number and listened to voicemail take his anger like a toll. He felt a threat larger than phones and more intimate than property theft. Vanessa told him Afton meant to finish his work, to close a story with the same brutal punctuation as before. Lights went out that night in a way that was not municipal, but intimate. The sound of Freddy's warped music box threaded through the darkness like a lullaby played backward. Eyes opened in the dark and moved like distant flashlights. They learned the difference between panic and strategy. Doors sealed. Flashlights died. When the sun came up, they were still alive, but the building had sharpened itself to the geometry of a trap. Afton came like a revelation, slow, smiling, and wearing spring Bonnie like a second skin. The suit was a mess of age and industry, wires gone taut, foam eaten away at the seams. He could walk like a man, and like something stitched into machine rhythm. On camera, he looked like a ghost in company clothes. On the ground, he looked like someone who had never stopped performing his greatest hits of violence. There is a moment when guilt and reckoning collide. Mike watched Afton on the monitors and watched the angles of his own past slide into place. The purple car. Garrett. Afton's voice on tape, bland, sugared, always directing. It was Afton on a dozen small doorsteps of memory. "I took and killed him," he said on the feed, the confession dry as a desert and as sharp as a blade. He had the right kind of quiet. Vanessa moved like someone who had rehearsed the moment of final confrontation in 1,000 small nightmares. They used cameras like plans, corridors like chess squares. Freddy obeyed Afton like clockwork, no longer an animatronic but an instrument. Foxy's cove became a throat that could swallow. Bonnie was a harvest of angles. Chica was a persistent hunger with teeth. Afton wanted to make a show. He wanted to finish the last act of a play whose script he had written in blood. He meant to put Mike in the same place Garrett had been. Mike found himself running on muscle memory and panic, in those same rooms where every child had learned how to be small and orderly and watched. Vanessa fought the man in the costume with a terrible desperation. Whoever she was before this place had chosen her, she was now a person who would not let the theater of cruelty close without an audience. Spring locks are small mechanisms with a habit of betraying men in suits. They are exacting and archaic, an old compromise between man and machine. Under the wrong pressure, they fail with a sound like 1,000 needles and a single groan. Afton's body learned this precise cruelty. There was a moment the world compressed to the metallic twang of those locks releasing, a man trying to pull something that was not meant to be pulled. When the suit folded inward on itself in a final, sickening collapse, it was less a death than an unbaking. The animatronics turned on him, as if his dying had broken his hold of the place. The robots that had been used became the instruments that returned. The building itself began to protest. Tiles cracked, rigging seized, tiles loosened as if the place wanted to forget its last performance. Mike and Vanessa grabbed what they could. Afton's pockets yielded the payroll and a bonus check heavy enough to stop the rent clock for months. And they fled as wood and wire, and a man in costume remembered the old physics of rot and fell inward. Afton spat a promise as he bled into the backstage carpet. It was some truly haunting words. "I'll be back. I always come back." The town received a fire report the next day that didn't mention names. There were interviews, lots of questions, and sympathetic coffee cups exchanged at early hours. The press tasted the edges of the story, but left them for someone else to chew. Mike and Vanessa returned to the rental house and found Abby waiting in front of a TV playing cartoons. Mike held the paycheck like something taxable and wonderful. Abby laughed in that way kids do when they think the world is still safe and predictable. Her birthday that August felt like a fragile promise Mike intended to keep. Vanessa moved into the house with them. She made small improvements to the house, putting locks on the doors and leaving nightlights burning at the windows, and told bedtime stories that were stripped of animatronic laughter. Mike tried not to imagine what Afton had said. The promise had a way of ringing like a bell. He tried to make plans. He tried to forget the back room. He tried and failed and tried again. An old postcard of Freddy Fazbear sits on a kitchen shelf, the edges brown like leaves. It is summer light and the house smells like cake and something older, like unearthed metal. Abby's birthday candles glow in front of Mike, Abby, and Vanessa. Mike says he will take her to a park, maybe to the county fair. Vanessa says they are safe. Somewhere else in the town of Grand Rapids, however, in a block of rust and paint that had been left to decay longer than anyone remembered, another pizzeria breathed in slow shifts. On a display case, toy animatronics blinked into life, one small LED at a time. Somewhere in the distance, a music box turns, its tune faint and circular. A hint that the story is far from over. The town of Grand Rapids had learned to trade grief for ticket sales. In April 2005, about a year after Freddy Fazbear's pizza place collapsed in March 2004. After one desperate week of night shifts had exposed secrets no one wanted to speak. Tourists and locals folded the story into a festival. FazFest sold T-shirts, staged haunted tours of the rubble, and lit the town with carnival booths that smelled of fried dough and synthetic fear. Families came for the spectacle. Conspiracy podcasts came for the footage. Children came for animatronic mascots. Mike Schmidt, who'd escaped the collapsed pizzeria with a scar and questions in his pockets, kept trying to be ordinary. He and Vanessa Shelley lived in a bigger, steadier house now and took care of his sister Abby, who was now 12. Abby had never seen the animatronics alive the way Mike and Vanessa had. She only knew them from stories and from model endoskeletons she built in secret. She glued tiny servos and painted fake fur in the evenings, patient and fascinated. To Mike, that fascination felt like a promise he had never wanted to make. One day after the collapse, he had told Abby he would fix the real animatronics. Vanessa, who carried the weight of being Afton's daughter, told Mike not to give his sister hope. The scars didn't need to be reopened. They needed rest. But rest was a currency the town couldn't afford. The cameras loved the past. And the past, badly mended, has a way of waking. Jeremiah had been Mike's friend since grade school. He'd gone indie with a paranormal investigation startup and posted sleepy, grainy videos that steadily grew traction. He called Mike one drizzly afternoon while the festival booths at FazFest went up. "He's gone missing," Jeremiah said. He meant Steve Raglan, the recruiter who had quietly staffed local places until the sudden collapse. To everyone else, Raglan had vanished like bad sleep, but Mike felt a chill every time his name came up. Raglan had been more than a recruiter. Raglan had been a smile with teeth. Mike and Vanessa knew the truth. They knew the man's real identity, William Afton. But the rest of the town didn't. "Hey, Mike, remember that bite story I told you?" Jeremiah said. "Well, I want to look for the original Freddy building. The one from the 1980s. You remember it from the old pictures, right? I used to go there as a kid. I want to film it. Real footage, no filters." Mike refused. He'd gone through the black heart of an unspeakable nightmare once. He'd woken with terrors and promises whispered by a dying man who had said he would return. "No way, not me," he said. "I'm done with Freddy's." Jeremiah didn't push. He recruited a crew instead. Matthew, a steady cameraman. Mark, who carried sound gear and a noise detector. And Jeremy Fitzgerald, an ex-security guard who remembered the original pizzeria like a map in his head. They left in a rattling van before dawn. Jeremiah's pitch included a story he kept repeating, the bite of '87. This is what happened on that fateful day in 1987, when his friend Ryan lost everything. The birthday party had been a whirl of balloons and confetti. Ryan's mother had set him on the little stage inside Kids Cove, while other kids pressed faces to the safety glass, and Jeremiah looked on from a distance. The Mangle, a take-apart Foxy rebuild, had been a messy, tinkered thing kids loved to examine, its exposed wires and playful claws treated like a puzzle. Ryan had loved to tug and probe. He'd reached into its mouth to push a loose cog back into place. The Mangle's jaw, loosened from all of the times it had been stripped and reassembled by kids, snapped. An accidental clamp, some said. Others later whispered of a deliberate failure. Metal pinched bone, the sound was not cinematic but vividly real, a sick, wet crunch. Ryan cried out, fell backward, and blood from his arm pooled on the stage carpet. The party dissolved into chaos. Parents screamed, chairs scraped. Jeremiah, 10 years old and frozen, spoke later of a man in a yellow spring Bonnie suit standing in the pizzeria's parking lot beyond a window, watching with purple, unblinking eyes and a large knife held in a yellow hand. The sight seared into Jeremiah. An adult smiling from outside the world, eyes like cold machine lights. Ryan was taken to nearby hospital. Infection set in. Desperate surgeons worked, but the wound had gone too deep. He died a week later, and no amount of therapy could rearrange the echo of that scream. The pizzeria closed in disgrace later that year. No grand hearing, no proper justice. Because the town preferred a closed sign to an open indictment. That memory was the key to Jeremiah's obsession. He had to see the old pizzeria one more time. After discovering an old forgotten camera during the crew's exploration that had recorded the tragic bite of '87 event all of those years ago, he uploaded the footage in addition to what his crew's newly recorded pizzeria exploration footage had captured. The video, which Jeremiah titled Mangle's Revenge, went viral like a rumor with teeth. The original building crouched behind chain link and a sagging sign that read Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Its windows were soggy with grime. Inside, it smelled like old adhesive, popcorn oil, and that unmistakable copper hint people equate with old blood. Jeremy led them down a hallway lit by the weak cone of headlamps. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Chica stood on a low stage, bright paint dulled by dust but shockingly intact. Toy Foxy was gone. Jeremy explained in an uneven voice. Kids had loved to take Foxy apart to make contests of who could reassemble the shell. The pieces had been looped back together, twisted in new ways, and eventually some maintenance had built that heap into what would later be called the Mangle. A terrifying animatronic with a bad sense of boundaries. The crew filmed the withered animatronics. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Stuffed in a darker wing like ghosts in storage. Jeremy's voice took on a quiet hush as he said they'd been moved here after the franchise location's collapse, a reluctant archive of what the company once discarded. They rode a boat ride, a half-functional novelty that sloshed along an indoor canal, passing murals and peeling stickers. On the wall beside Kids Cove, a poster showed a grinning Mangle and the other toy animatronics from the old brochures. Let's eat, party, rock, play, have take apart fun, rendered now like a lie. Then everything during their exploration fell apart. Mark wandered down a side hall to get cleaner audio and stumbled upon a small room with a music box. He wound the key. The puppet's terrifying face slid open like a grin. For a beat, the world seemed to inhale. Then the puppet moved with the sick patience of a marionette and strangled the breath out of Mark. His scream shredded the air. Matthew swung his camera, tried to back away, and the withered models came alive with a thought that might have once been instruction, and now was simply hunger. Mechanical hands reached. Matthew's recorder caught metal claws, and a thud too heavy to be staged. Withered Foxy's hook sliced through a hall and met Matthew. He was dragged away, his screams stuttering and then cut dead. Jeremiah and Jeremy ran for their life. Foot on gravel truck doors, the van's engine keening like an animal woke too soon. Only Jeremiah and Jeremy escaped with footage. The rest were eaten by the building. The morning after Jeremiah posted the footage, Abby left a note on the kitchen table. She'd watched Mangle's Revenge and wanted to see the animatronics for herself. She left in a hurry, bicycle wheels ringing down the street in a Faz talker, a plastic toy speaker sold at FazFest that played canned Freddy phrases, tucked into her bike's basket like a gift. Mike found the note and the empty kitchen and felt a collapse of air in his chest. He and Vanessa drove out in their car, following tire marks and tiny shoe prints. They were hours late. Abby arrived at the original building as the sun dropped. She went inside, trusting the Faz talker's guidance and childlike invitations. She didn't know what Jeremy's footage had been missing. Perhaps it was the way certain eyes followed, maybe the way the Mangle's spare parts looked like a hand reaching for a lost child. When she wandered into the office, the Mangle grabbed her, its animatronic limbs closing with clinical force, and forced her fingers onto a dusty keypad. She typed without understanding, the code the Mangle had learned the town might never have meant to use. 1987. The safes in that office were wired to safety latches, but the old systems responded. Doors clicked. The world shifted, and for the first time since they'd been placed in that building, the toy and withered animatronics were free to leave. Abby ran home crying but alive. She had no idea what she'd just done. Mike didn't want the pizzeria again. But when the animatronics started to walk empty streets in Grand Rapids, he had no choice. He agreed to help lock down the original building. The plan was simple. Get inside, check the cams, and use known tricks to hold them off. However, it turned out that it wasn't so simple. Night 1, the head trick. Mike sat in a cramped office with a bank of monitors. The toy animatronics, calibrated like the old promo footage, moved with sticky, childlike motions. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Chica walked through the hallways as viewed on the cameras, and then toward the office. When they reached the office threshold, Toy Freddy's camera eyes locked on a human form, Mike. The old trick worked. Mike shoved a battered Freddy Fazbear head over his own and became, to the machine's sensors, one of them. He sat like a statue until they retreated. Night 2, the hallway and Balloon Boy. Balloon Boy's laughter echoed like a child's broken music box. Mike caught a glimpse down the office's central hallway. Withered Foxy's one mechanical eye shone like a fossil ember. With the flashlight he used like a metronome, Mike forced the animatronic fox to retreat into the shadows until dawn. Each soft metallic scrape on the vents sounded like a countdown. Night 3, parts and service. Mike and Vanessa explored the deep, rotten heart of the place. The parts and service room. The air was thick with grease and the stale sweetness of old pizza. In the dark, there lay a corner where something moved slower than the rest. Vanessa found it first. A faded child's shoe. The real horror came when the lamps clicked on and the room showed itself whole. A line of small bodies tucked between crates, bones veiled in older, brittle plastic. Henry Emily later described them as the 5 missing children. The room had held the victims of William Afton's earliest crimes in a dark mess of parts and wires. From a brighter corner, Withered Freddy and the other withered animatronics stirred. Red eyes painted the room in bloodless light. With a single brutal swing, Withered Freddy's neck joint snapped toward Mike. Withered Freddy's metal teeth grated into Mike's forearm. Freddy tasted blood. Mike ran like a hunted man, routing through vents, down service corridors, slipping through stacks of crates with animatronic fingers scraping his back. Vanessa caught him at a medical station and stitched him until his arm stopped bleeding. They returned at 5 a.m., and with the Freddy head trick, a mask he'd thought was useless on the older models, Mike watched withered Chica pass by the office, passionless and almost tender in her mechanical routine. The mask worked again, as if the machines recognized not the model but the program. Night 4, they leave the building. That night they learned the rules had changed. There was a new set of rules. The animatronics no longer belonged to halls. They could leave. Vent shafts emitted the sound of copper and the patter of small gears. Toy Freddy sidled into the FazFest fairgrounds and, like a predator with a child's voice, attacked festival goers. His jaws clamped on a vendor's throat as if to test the taste of warm, living flesh. At the same time, the Mangle leapt onto a car, and the driver's hands twisted the wheel as shards of glass rained down. The car crashed into a string of booths and caught fire. Toy Bonnie crawled into a suburban living room and stabbed a homeowner through the throat with a screwdriver that had been meant for stage repairs. Toy Chica, once an apron-clad joke, found Abby's school and tore through classroom windows. Teachers were pulled out screaming into the grass. The Marionette and Balloon Boy, on cables and motors, but with their own malice, snatched children from porches and left empty swings jerking in the dark. The town's ambulances and police were swamped. Jeremiah walked the streets in a soggy raincoat, terror on his tongue as he pointed at bloody bodies while shaking and trembling. "If we don't stop them tomorrow night," he told Mike with a voice like a snapped string, "half of this town will be dead by sunrise." The 5th night and Henry's confession. Desperate and exhausted, Mike, Jeremiah, and Vanessa found the one man who might have an answer. Henry Emily. Henry had retreated from the world, but he kept tinkering. He had always been ashamed of what he'd helped make. In his basement workshop, there were blueprints rolled like fragile scrolls, newspaper clippings taped together about Afton's early ambitions, and a single lamp that made little islands of light in a sea of dust. Henry's revelation hit like a dropped hammer. He told them the truth in pieces. He and William Afton had once been partners, dreamers who wanted to build a place where laughter and technology met. They'd made the animatronics like Freddy Fazbear to charm children, and, as a cover, a system to channel a darker obsession. Henry told Mike about Charlotte, his daughter, who had died during a birthday party at the pizzeria in 1980. In a flashback, Henry showed Mike a flailing and screaming little girl smothered by a misstep. Charlotte had fallen, hit her head on a stage corner, and died before the songs ended. Henry had kept the grief private, thinking it an accident. Years later, in 1985, 5 children vanished at the original pizzeria, the missing children incident, and Henry put the pieces together. Those disappearances were no accident. Henry realized the pattern and finally saw Afton for what he was, a man who weaponized joy to conceal cruelty. Henry's daughter had been the first he murdered. Mike's abducted brother, Garrett Schmidt, had been his second a few years later in 1984, and soon after others followed. Henry believed Afton had used the animatronics as a method of concealment, a way to get kids near his abductions and hide the bodies where no one looked. Behind curtains, in parts rooms, and under masks, the spring-lock suits had been a last-gasp attempt at physical disguise, a horrific technology that could kill the human inside if it failed. Henry agreed to help. He fashioned an EMP-style pulse rig and a frequency modulator that would coax the animatronics into a safe mode, and then shut down critical servomotors. It was a fragile plan built on math, trust, and nerve. They returned to the original pizzeria, the five of them, Mike, Vanessa, Abby, Henry, and Jeremy, walking into a place slick with the sheen of the night's rain. Afton, now Springtrap, was there. He moved like a man stitched into a costume of rotten fur. When he spoke, it sounded like old hinges. "Did you really think I was gone? Where are you gonna run to? Now I'm going to kill you." He lunged at Mike, the suit's springlocks coughing like dying machines. The fight was close. Springtrap's claws found Mike's side. Pain flared white-hot, but he kept moving. Vanessa struck Springtrap with a heavy pipe. The suit staggered. Henry slammed his device into a control bank. The animatronics convulsed. Wires sparked and died. Servos stilled like puppets cut from strings. The remaining robots sagged back into their fixed poses. The crew sealed doors. They watched the machines like sleeping animals, and for the first time in days, the town took a long, trembling breath. Springtrap escaped through a grate and into the night. The damage he did was grave, but Henry made sure the pizzeria would no longer open its doors. They sealed the place. They returned the toys and wizards to a place they could no longer touch without risking more death. Grand Rapids stitched itself back together. Patrols and night watches were set, and parents kept children close. Henry retreated to his workshop to repair what he could, guilt and gear, and Mike, Vanessa, and Abby tried to go home and be a family within the new quiet. At first, they believed the worst was over. Abby went back to building tiny models, this time with tighter safety wiring. She sold them in a small online store that paid for bandages and therapy. Mike took day shifts, stayed off long nights, and drank coffee like someone learning to sleep again. But a weathered sign is seen on the outskirts of the town of Grand Rapids outside an old storefront, Fazbear's Family Diner. Old lights winked in its windows. Inside, a single bulb cast a glow over an isolated corner where something moved in the dark and made soft, metallic sounds. The hint was quiet, a dim light, a hum of an old motor, and it told a story worse than anything else. The work had not ended. Springtrap had not vanished. He lay down in other shadows, watched other rooms, and planned. Mangle's revenge had been costly. Townspeople counted coffins, stitched wounds, and burned what they could. The last sound is not music, but the soft tick of a clock, and underneath it, the mechanical scratch of claws against plaster. Yet on the edge of town, in the crumbling bones of a place that had predated the rest, a shape withdrew into a diner's backroom and began to unpick itself, to ready for the next act.